Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It is your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing. Today we are discussing what is formerly Omega Museum Collection number 10. This is the MD's Watch 1938. This was launched in 2010 in 1,938 pieces in yellow gold, and it is a recreation of a doctor's chronograph from Omega's historic catalog. The watch is 39 millimeters in diameter in yellow gold, measures 12.2 millimeters thick from end to end, lug to lug. It measures 45.9 millimeters with a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. We'll throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference. You can see it wears nicely, comfortably, flat enough that it'll slide underneath a dress cuff, and then narrow enough across the wrist that I could recommend this watch for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. It really would wear well on a lady's wrist or a petite wrist. And because it is vintage style, the compact dimensions and chaste proportions really recommend it for almost any smaller wrist and formal attire. There is something about a yellow gold compact chronograph made for a doctor that just zings me as a dress option, especially for people who have a taste for traditional sizes or a need for smaller sizes. Taking a quick look, you can see that the watch is equipped with a reddish brown, large rectangular scale alligator leather strap, matte finish. It has a folded edge, a monotone stitch, and you can see that there's no crimping, no gouging. It's calfskin on the bottom. It's a brand new Omega factory strap. It includes a dress watch appropriate Omega rose gold pin buckle, and note that they used the vintage Omega logo on the buckle to match the logo that features on the case. The case itself is simple. Integrated lugs from an era when form follows function was all the rage. Think the Patek Philippe Reference 96, the first Calatrava, the IWC 324 Portugueser, and of course the 1938 predecessor of this model. Blended lugs into the case band, polished lug hoods, satin case. You can see there's a little case knife slot for your watchmaker to take it apart. The bezel has a little vertical segment that's slightly stepped in from the case band to visually thin the watch. Then there's a conical profile and a very, very narrow flat top to this bezel, and we have a dramatically boxed and cambered sapphire that is supposed to read as a vintage plexiglass. Flip it all over, vintage-inspired pump-style pushers, and a polished and media-blasted crown that is thin in profile like a vintage crown and features that vintage Omega logo on top of it. The dial might look a little bit white in the video, but as I read it in person, it's more ivory than white. It has distinctive cream off-white undertones. We have a lovely pulsation scale outboard. The way this works is if you are a doctor or an MD, as per the nomenclature of this watch, you will hold the patient's pulse, assuming it's going to be a wrist, and then you start your chronograph and you just count the pulses. You let the watch keep the time, you count the pulses, and if, for example, you count 30 pulses, 30, right then, you know it's going to be between 160 and 170 beats per minute. Now, there is a smaller scale inboard that features lovely Breguet Arabic numerals, and we have a little scale for reading fractions of seconds, chronograph seconds, and minutes. We have that old Omega marquee and logo, and then we have two registers. One is running seconds, one is the chronograph minutes, and you can see this watch does feature a hacking or stop seconds function. It also features a vertical clutch, so when you start the chronograph, there's no jump or stagger to the chronograph seconds hand, and if you wish, you can leave the chronograph running full time. That's one of the great advantages of a vertical clutch chrono. Just leave it running. There's no additional wear and tear on the movement. Now, it's also a column wheel chronograph, which means the action is super crisp and well tuned. You feel and hear the quality of the column wheel. It's also a semi-instantaneous minute jumper. On the reverse side, we have the Museum Collection engraving, Collector's Series number 10. This is number 308 of 1938, and of course 1938 was the year the original was made. The movement inside this is what Omega calls a 3203, based on the Frédéric Piguet 1285. Frédéric Piguet is a high horology movement manufacturer inside of Swatch Group that is today manufacturer Blancpain. And some lucky Swatch Group brands are able to get some movements from Frédéric Piguet and use them in their watches. And so an FP 1285 is a much higher grade movement than you would conventionally find in an Omega of this era. It's not a 2894 modular chrono, it's not a 7750, and the combination of the vertical clutch and the column wheel, as well as thicker construction than the thinner FP 1185, make this a finer movement than most Omegas and a tougher movement than most FPs and Blancpains. And that's because the 1185, which shares its fundamental architecture with this movement, is thin and fine, but it's also somewhat delicate as a result. The 1285 is a little bit thicker and more robust, plus it adds features that the basic 1185 doesn't have, like, for example, a free-sprung balance, a coaxial escapement, a chronometer certification, a hacking seconds function. All of those functions and features, plus a 55-hour power reserve, distinguish the Omega 3203 from the FP 1185, and even the 1285 doesn't have some of the features that the Omega version has, most notably the chronometer certification, the free-sprung balance, and the coaxial escapement. The coaxial escapement remains one of the great allures in luxury class watchmaking. If you consider the luxury three to be Breitling, Omega, and Rolex historically, by far the most sophisticated escapement design that you can buy in that class, and maybe even most sophisticated design you can buy under $50,000, remains the coaxial. It's a double impulse escapement, direct and indirect, that trades sliding friction for tangential friction, and of course George Daniels developed it for Omega. Ultimately, he offered it to everyone, but Omega purchased the rights and industrialized it, and so it's become a real calling card for the brand in the years since. This watch is actually 50 meters water resistant, so far more than a vintage watch, and even a little bit more than a standard dress watch, so quite a few technical exclusivities and feathers in its cap for a watch that has a lovely and enduring vintage style. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.